The airport was a place of mixed voices, hurried footsteps, and constant announcements echoing through the halls. On that gray morning, no one seemed to notice Rex, the dog with deep eyes and caramel-colored fur, faithfully sitting beside his small travel crate, occasionally wagging his tail as if waiting to hear the familiar voice of his owner. He always did, on every trip. But this time, something was different. Rex and his owner, Josh, were inseparable. Josh was a simple middle-aged man, with a kind smile and tired eyes that concealed a past of struggles. He had adopted Rex 4 years ago, at a time in his life when everything seemed to be falling apart. An accident had left him a widower, and suddenly, loneliness was his only companion. But then Rex appeared, a stray puppy, thin and helpless, with eyes as sad as Josh. And in that silent connection, an unbreakable bond was formed. Together, they overcame the darkest times. When the nights were too long and Josh, thoughts too heavy, Rex was there, gently laying his head on his owner's feet, providing a comfort that no words could offer. Gradually, Josh's life began to find its rhythm again, and every step he took, every decision he made, included Rex. He was more than just a dog. He was family. On this particular morning, Josh was anxious. He and Rex were about to board a flight to a distant city, where Josh's son, Robert, awaited them for a long-awaited family reunion. It was the first time in years they would all be together, and Josh couldn't wait to introduce Rex to Robert. It was an opportunity for a fresh start, a chance to rebuild the bonds that had been lost. The family, which had been shattered after the death of Josh's wife, now seemed to have a chance to heal. However, amidst the chaos of the airport, fate had an unexpected trial in store. Distracted by last-minute boarding procedures and the rush of it all, Josh didn't realize he had left something vital behind. Something irreplaceable. Rex. The dog sat patiently, unaware that Josh had boarded the plane without him. He had no way of knowing that the flight was taking off, leaving him behind. Minutes turned into hours, and the once bustling airport began to empty. The lights dimmed, the staff began to leave, but Rex stayed in place. He waited, with the unwavering loyalty that only a dog could have. As time passed, an airport worker named Jane noticed the lone dog. Her heart sank at the sight of him, so quiet and seemingly lost. She tried to approach, but Rex was cautious. He only knew one person, trusted only one voice, and it wasn't Jane's. Sensing the situation, Jane called the airport authorities, who began searching for any information about the dog's owner. That's when they discovered the terrible mistake. Josh had boarded the flight without Rex. The plane was now thousands of miles away, and the owner likely hadn't even realized yet that his beloved dog was missing. With a heavy heart, Jane knew she couldn't leave the animal there any longer. She tried to comfort him, offering water and food, but Rex barely moved. His gaze remained fixed on the door, waiting, believing that at any moment, Josh would return. Meanwhile, on the plane, Josh was consumed by an increasing sense of unease. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. It wasn't until the plane landed and he turned to see the empty seat where Rex should have been that the horror of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. The dog who meant everything to him, the one who had brought him back to life, had been left behind. Panic gripped Josh. What could he do? How could he have been so careless? He rushed through the arrival terminal, desperately trying to find someone who could help him contact the departure airport. The guilt and fear were overwhelming, and while Josh scrambled to find a solution, Rex remained in the now empty terminal, with sad eyes and a heavy heart, still waiting for his best friend. Hours passed slowly for Rex, and every sound in the deserted airport made his heart beat faster, hoping it was Josh returning. He didn't understand what had happened. The airport staff that passed by tried to soothe him, but he didn't want food, didn't want water. He only wanted his owner. It was as if everything around him had lost meaning, and the world had shrunk to that endless weight. Meanwhile, the news about Rex began to spread among the airport staff. Jane, the employee who had found him, volunteered to stay with him until something was resolved. She was an animal lover, and seeing that dog so alone and sad broke her heart. She knew Rex was suffering, and her kind soul wouldn't allow her to leave him even more lost in that vast terminal. On the other side, Josh could barely believe what he had done. He couldn't stop blaming himself, replaying the scene at the airport over and over in his mind, trying to understand how he had left Rex behind. How could he have been so distracted? Desperation was starting to set in, and every second felt like an eternity without knowing what had happened to his faithful friend. Josh, in his haste, tried to buy a ticket back immediately, but all the flights were full. The only option was to wait until the next day. The wait seemed unbearable. Sitting in the airport at his destination, he clutched Rex's leash in his hands, as if holding onto it kept him connected to the dog. Tears would come from time to time, and he didn't even try to hold them back. The pain of imagining Rex alone, confused, and maybe even scared, was too much to bear. As the night fell, Rex curled up slowly on top of Josh's backpack, which had been left beside his crate. The familiar scent of his owner brought him some comfort, but at the same time, it was a cruel reminder that Josh was no longer there. His eyes began to close from exhaustion, but his body didn't rest. He was on alert, always ready to run toward Josh's voice if he heard it. Jane, sitting a short distance away, watched everything with a heavy heart. She knew Rex's owner had been contacted, but also knew it would take time for him to return. She thought about taking Rex home with her for the night, but each time she tried to approach, he backed away, his eyes still fixed on the airport door, waiting, hoping to see Josh walk through it at any moment. Morning came, and Rex was still waiting. His patience and loyalty were unshaken, but he was beginning to feel Josh's absence in a way that even humans might not fully understand. It was as if a part of his heart was missing, and without it, he didn't know how to go on. Meanwhile, Josh barely slept. He spent the night in an airport chair, checking the clock every few minutes, desperate for the next flight that would take him back to Rex. The guilt that weighed on him was unbearable. Rex had been by his side through the darkest times of his life, and now, when Rex needed him most, he had failed. Josh knew it wasn't just the longing that was crushing him, but the fear of losing the only being who had brought him back to life after so long in the dark. Finally, the time for his return flight came, and Josh boarded the plane, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. He knew every minute counted, and all he wanted was to run back to the airport where Rex was waiting for him. But for Rex, those hours felt like an endless nightmare. Back at the airport, Jane arrived for her shift and immediately checked on Rex. He was still there, sitting patiently, but now his eyes looked more hollow. She couldn't help but wonder how the reunion would unfold, and whether the owner would return in time. There was something almost magical about the bond between humans and animals, something Jane knew few fully understood. And at that moment, she committed herself to making sure that Rex would be treated with the dignity and love he deserved. As Josh flew back, he reflected on Rex's role in his life. He remembered the nights when silent tears overtook him, and how Rex would simply be there, asking for nothing, just offering his presence. Rex was more than just a dog. He was an angel who had been sent to save Josh's life. And now, Josh felt that, in a way, it was his turn to save Rex. The plane landed, and Josh wasted no time. He ran through the airport halls, ignoring the curious glances from other passengers. His eyes were fixed on the only thing that mattered, the place where he had left Rex. His breathing was heavy, and his heart pounded as if he were racing against time, against fate, to fix the mistake he had made. When he reached the terminal, he spotted Jane and, just ahead, Rex. The dog was still sitting, his gaze fixed on the door. Josh shouted his name with all the strength in his lungs, and at that moment, something changed. Josh's voice echoed through the terminal, filling the silence that had dominated the space for hours. "Rex," he shouted, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope so overwhelming it felt like it would burst. Upon hearing his name, the dog immediately lifted his head. His once dull and tired eyes lit up in a way Jane had never seen before. Rex stood up, his tail wagging hesitantly at first, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But then his eyes locked onto Josh, and it was as if the world made sense again. He bolted towards his owner, running with all the energy he had left, darting across the terminal as though nothing else mattered, as if that moment was the only thing that existed. Josh fell to his knees, arms wide open, tears streaming freely down his face. He could barely speak, only managing to repeat Rex's name between sobs. When the dog reached him, he leaped into Josh's arms, licking his face with a desperate joy. It was as if all the waiting, all the anguish and confusion, had melted away in that instant. The two of them stayed there, on the cold floor of the airport, locked in a silent embrace that spoke more than any words ever could. Josh clutched Rex tightly, never wanting to let him go again. He whispered apologies over and over, promising that nothing like this would ever happen again. But Rex, in his infinite loyalty and love, harbored no grudge. To him, all that mattered was that Josh was there, back by his side, where he belonged. Jane, watching from a distance, couldn't hold back her own tears. She had known there was something special about their relationship, but seeing the reunion up close was an experience that touched her soul in ways she couldn't describe. It was as if all the hardship both Josh and Rex had endured, the waiting, the fear, culminated in that pure moment of joy and relief. But while the reunion was heartwarming, it didn't erase the trauma of the last few days. Rex, still exhausted from the long wait and emotional strain, began to show signs of deep fatigue. His breathing was heavy, and he seemed more fragile than Josh remembered. The airport veterinarian, who had been called to check on Rex, arrived shortly after and suggested that they take the dog to a clinic, just as a precaution. With his heart heavy, Josh agreed immediately. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Rex, not now, not after everything they had been through. The guilt that still weighed on him made him fear the worst. What if Rex had gotten sick because of the separation? What if those hours alone had caused permanent damage? The thought of losing his companion was almost unbearable. On the way to the clinic, Josh kept one hand on Rex's head the entire time, as if his touch could protect the dog from any harm. Rex, in turn, remained calm, but his eyes showed his exhaustion. He was safe now, and for him, that was enough. When they arrived at the clinic, the veterinarian carefully examined Rex. Josh watched closely, each movement of the doctor adding another wave of anxiety. The silence in the examination room was crushing, and every second seemed to stretch into an eternity. After a few tests, the vet turned to Josh with a serious, but not alarming, expression. Rex was dehydrated and exhausted, which wasn't surprising given what he had been through. However, there were no signs of any serious complications. With rest and proper care, the vet assured Josh, Rex would make a full recovery. Josh let out a deep sigh of relief, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. He thanked the vet repeatedly, barely able to contain his gratitude. Knowing that Rex would be all right was the most precious gift he could receive at that moment. With Rex back at his side and on the mend, Josh decided it was time to take a break. The last few days had been emotionally draining for both of them, and all he wanted now was to spend time with his loyal companion, far from airports and the rush of the world. Josh, now more aware of the impact Rex had on his life, decided to take him to a special place, a peaceful countryside retreat where the two of them could rest and recover together. It wasn't just a physical recovery for Rex, but also a moment of reflection for Josh. He knew that without Rex, his life would have taken a much darker, lonelier path. And now, he wanted to make sure that the dog who had given him so much also received the care and love he deserved. As they drove toward the countryside, Rex rested on the passenger seat, his head on Josh's lap. The winding road felt like a metaphor for the journey they had traveled together, full of ups and downs, unexpected turns, but always with the right destination in mind, the unconditional love they shared. The sound of birds and the gentle breeze blowing through the car window created an atmosphere of peace. Josh glanced at Rex from time to time, a soft smile spreading across his face. He knew that, despite everything, they had overcome another trial together. And at that moment, Josh felt a deep gratitude for the second chance to be with Rex, knowing that the time they spent together from now on would be even more precious. The countryside retreat where Josh decided to stay with Rex was the perfect setting for their recovery. Located a few miles from the city, the place was surrounded by green fields and trees that swayed gently with the breeze. It was the kind of peace that Josh had sought for years but never had the courage to embrace. Now, more than ever, he understood the importance of slowing down, living in the present, and treasuring the moments with those we love. Rex slowly began to recover. The exhaustion that had once weighed him down began to fade, and his usual energy gradually returned. He ran through the fields with the same enthusiasm he had as a puppy, as if rediscovering the joy of freedom and fresh air. Each day was a small victory, and each step he took was a reminder that the worst was behind them. Josh spent his days watching Rex, reflecting on the twists and turns life takes, and how much had changed since the dog entered his life. He remembered how it all began, the day he found Rex abandoned on the street, so thin and frail, and how, without realizing it, Rex had become the pillar that kept him standing during the hardest times. The bond between them was not just that of owner and pet, but companions on a journey, united by a loyalty and unconditional love that few truly understood. The days passed slowly, but each one was filled with meaning. Josh woke up early, made coffee while Rex patiently waited by his side, both enjoying the tranquility that the countryside offered. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the airport and the anguish they had both felt. Now, everything was lighter, simpler. They were together, and that was enough. One late afternoon, as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Josh decided it was time to call his son, Robert. It was a call he had been putting off for days, ever since they arrived at the retreat. Not because he didn't want to, but because he needed to reconnect with himself before trying to reconnect with his family. The phone rang several times before Robert picked up. "Hello, Dad." Robert's voice sounded surprised and cautious, as if he hadn't expected the call. "Hi, son. I just wanted to hear your voice. It's been so long." Josh hesitated for a moment, the words tangling in his throat. He knew he needed to say more than just an apology. He had to open his heart. "It's been a long time since I heard yours too, Dad. I thought you didn't want to talk to me anymore," Robert replied, the hurt still evident in his voice. Josh sighed. "I know I made a lot of mistakes, son. When your mother died, I shut down. I pushed you and everyone else away because I didn't know how to deal with the pain. But that doesn't excuse anything. I'm truly sorry." Robert was silent for a few seconds, and Josh feared he had said something wrong. But then he heard a sigh on the other end of the line. "I missed you too, Dad. I just didn't know how to reach you. When you adopted Rex, I felt like he was taking the place I wanted in your life." Robert's words cut deep into Josh's heart. He had never thought that his son might feel that way. "Rex helped me survive, son. But he never took your place. You've always been and will always be the most important part of my life. I wanted so much for you to meet him, to be part of this new phase." The silence between them was filled with the soft melody of the wind rustling through the trees around the retreat. Josh felt more vulnerable than ever before. Yet, he knew that this moment was necessary. Finally, Robert broke the silence. "Maybe it's time to try again, Dad. Maybe it's time for all of us to start over. I'd like to meet Rex." Josh felt his eyes welling up with tears, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from hope. "I'd love for you to come, Robert. This place is perfect, and I think it would be good for all of us. Rex will love meeting you, and I'd love to have my son back." Robert agreed to visit Josh at the retreat the following week. And for the first time in many years, Josh felt that his family had a real chance to heal. What had begun as a journey filled with anxiety and confusion was now turning into something beautiful, something he never thought possible. In the days that followed, Josh and Rex continued to enjoy the peace and tranquility of the countryside. Josh devoted time to caring for Rex, feeding him homemade meals and taking him on long walks. Rex, for his part, seemed happier than ever. His physical recovery was nearly complete, but emotionally, it was clear he had already healed. The reunion with Josh had wiped away all the painful memories of their separation, and the dog was once again full of joy. Finally, the day of Robert's visit arrived. Josh waited anxiously at the gate of the retreat, with Rex by his side, both watching the horizon as Robert's car approached. When the car stopped and Robert stepped out, there was a moment of hesitation, but then Rex, always so sensitive to human emotions, was the first to move. He ran toward Robert, as if he understood that this young man was an important part of Josh's life and, therefore, his life too. Robert, surprised by the warm welcome, knelt down to greet Rex, laughing at the dog's unexpected affection. When his eyes met Josh's, both of them smiled, and the smile said everything the words couldn't. It was the promise of a new beginning, of healing, of a family that, despite all the loss and separation, was ready to start anew. The reunion between Josh, his son, and Rex marked the beginning of a new chapter. Sitting together under the starry sky, the three of them formed a family that, despite being scarred by pain and separation, had found a way to rebuild. Sometimes, life surprises us with trials that seem impossible to overcome, but in the end, it's those very adversities that teach us the true value of love, loyalty, and forgiveness. Josh now understood that Rex was not just a companion on adventures. He was a symbol of Josh's own healing journey. When everything seemed lost, when grief had consumed him, it was Rex who brought hope back into his life. In the same way, Josh realized that reconnecting with his son was another crucial step in his complete recovery. Rex, with his simplicity and unconditional love, had been the link that brought them together again. For Robert, meeting Rex was an unexpected reminder of how love can heal old wounds and make room for new beginnings. He realized that by reconnecting with his father, he wasn't just restoring a long-lost relationship, but also embracing the future with less bitterness and more understanding. Josh and Rex's story is a reminder of the power of second chances. Life may push us away from the people we love, subject us to challenges that feel unbearable, but there's always a way back. Rex, with his patience and loyalty, teaches us that, no matter the storms, true love will always find its way home. And Josh, in realizing this, rediscovered the importance of living each moment, caring for those who love us, and most importantly, never giving up on ourselves or on others. For all of us, there is a valuable lesson in this story. Never underestimate the power of loyalty, empathy, and the love animals offer us. In their short lives, filled with dedication, they often show us what it truly means to be human.